Most of you probably know that cacao it came to the Old World or the rest of the world through Mesoamerica, even though the plant is of South American origin. Oddly enough, it's thought to have been a cross between two wild species of cacao in the Amazon basin, something like 10 or 15,000 years ago, and it's believed to be an anthropogenic cross, that is a hybrid made intentionally by human beings. But interestingly enough, that being the case, the first documented cultivation was in Mesoamerica, in the area where we are now, which is most of Mexico and part of Central America. And it goes back to something like 4,000 years here, and there are pretty good evidence that cultivation goes back. The species that we're dealing with is Theobroma cacao, and it's from the family Sterculiaceae, and there are a number of commercial cacaos, but it's strictly a New World genus. And although there are examples of Sterculiaceae from the Old World in other genera, and now, of course, it's grown in other areas. The interesting contrast also between South America and Mesoamerica is that until the Spaniards came, until the 16th century, in South America, it was never cultivated for the seeds. It was already in semi-cultivation there at that time. But there it was only cultivated for the white pulp around the seeds inside the fruits, which I'll show in just a moment. These are used for making beverages, especially in Brazil. It's very common in street-side juice stands and so forth, the beverage of cupuaçu, which is made from the sweet whitish pulp of Theobroma grandiflora, and perhaps of other species. And also here that is done in the areas where cacao is grown, but it's not a very big cultivation area in Mexico now. This slide shows the town of Cacahuatl, which is in Chiapas, not far from the Guatemala border. And in fact now, as I said, although the Spaniards introduced cacao to the Old World from Mesoamerica, it's not a leading cultivator of cacao at the moment. It's basically only found in the states of Chiapas and Tabasco, which are adjoining, and both also adjacent to Oaxaca. And perhaps spilling over a little bit into Oaxaca and also all through Central America. But the major cultivation now is in the Old World, especially in Africa. It's also grown in Asia. But it's the Gold Coast and Ivory Coast of Africa where you see the maximum cultivation of cacao. It's very much of a minor item in Mexico now. In the next slide I show a section fruit, so you can see the purplish fresh seeds and this white pulp that I'm talking about. And so in the preparation of cacao commercially, as I said, in South America it was grown for this pulp, and so it's simply separated and put into water, and it makes a very refreshing juice. And if you go to Brazil, you can get this cupuaçu, which is Theobroma grandiflora, pulp drink on the street. I've not seen it in Mexico, but it probably does exist. And in both areas also, this can be fermented to make an inebriating beverage. And so this also happens. But in fact, during the processing of cacao for the seeds, which was strictly a Mesoamerican practice, and again, the cultivation goes back farther here than it does in the home of the plant in South America, the whole mass is scooped out from the fruits and piled up in heaps, and then that fermentation is allowed to proceed just in a kind of a heap, piled up in a special space reserved for this. And that helps to separate the seeds after a few days of this fermentation. It helps to separate the seeds from the pulp, which is very mucilaginous. And it also is said by enzymatic reactions to enhance the alkaloidal content of the seed, which I will talk about a bit later. Next slide, please. And so you can see the cacao beans here after processing, and some of them are going around and you're already munching on them. But in any case, the seeds are cleaned out, the fresh seeds from this fermenting mass. Then they're generally sun-dried and roasted at a fairly low temperature. And for making, and that's what you see here. And they have a husk on the outside, which you're probably picking off of the ones that you are munching on. And so for making fine chocolates, that husk is separated off from the inner part, which is called the nib, and then this is again after roasting. And then it's crushed, and usually on stone rollers. And what comes out of that looks like molten chocolate, and it is called chocolate liquor. And that chocolate liquor, like if you go to the market here, there are stands that just sell that, and you can take even a big, 5-gallon tub and get it filled up, and it comes out of the machine molten. They usually mix it with granular sugar and cinnamon because it's prepared that way here in Mexico to use as a beverage with milk or water. But you can get it just straight also, and then of course it will harden into a block, like very hard dark chocolate, and it's quite bitter. And so for making chocolate candies, that is the basis of chocolate bars or chocolate candy, is the chocolate liquor, or chocolate mass is another name for it. And generally speaking, with commercial chocolates, well, I should backtrack for a second. In the late 19th century, a Dutchman named C.J. van Houten developed a process whereby with a large press, a hydraulic press, he was able to express some of the fat, much of the fat, I should say, from this cacao liquor or chocolate, cacao bean meal, to render the product drier and more soluble in milk or water, because of the fat inhibited this solubility and made it difficult to froth it up into a beverage. On the other hand, the same Van Houten, sometime after that, also developed what is today called the Dutch process for making soluble cocoa, which is a cacao powder. And in this case, the fat is pressed out with this hydraulic press, and then the resulting material is treated with alkaline salts, basic salts, and it results in enhanced mineral content and also better solubility. Now, this device is called a batidor, and the whisk is called a molinillo, or little mill. And this is how it was traditionally solubilized here, although they didn't have milk, it was in water. And the cacao seed, or bean itself, as well as this beverage, was called cacahuatl, which means water of cacao, or potion of cacao. Atl is water, but it also is often used to indicate that it's a potion. And this ingenious device, the molinillo, which is rubbed between the palms to impart a brisk rotary motion, reciprocating rotary motion to the head. It's often carved in points and has removable rings. Is a very good device for frothing and mixing things that aren't very soluble. And this is a genuine, fairly old one. I have some even older. Could I have the next slide, please? And this is the origin of that implement, the molinillo. This is a small palm called Camedoria tepehilote, and the common name is tepehilote. And this is very common. I have lots of them on my property. I had for a while a female donkey, and she really loved this plant and ate it, like lots of them. But so this is the bottom of the stem. It's a very small palm. It's in the Ericaceae, by the way, the group to which the betel nut palm belongs. And then they take it out with the roots and cut the roots down and just leave this part. And so this is the natural implement. And the other ones in the previous slide were like manufactured artifacts for doing the same thing. But again, this is a whisk, and it works very well. So that's the tepehilote. Next slide, please. And you can see, I haven't gone to the market, but this was in 1982 or 3 that I took this photograph. This is in the marketplace here in Oaxaca. And this is a beverage made that way. And she has one of those whisks sticking out of it. And this is called Tejate, which is a local version of a cacao potion. And it's this ground cacao with water, sweetened. And then it's whipped up into a froth, and you can see it's quite a foamy froth on top of it. Remember when I showed some of the codices, you would see this froth, but in that case it was brown to indicate cacao. But this particular potion, Tejate, contains a unique ingredient that also enables this frothing to be so dramatic. It's very mucilaginous, and it also helps to make a whipped cream effect. It's a flower. Could I have the next slide? Called Quararibea funebris. Quararibea funebris. and that's in the Bombaceae or the kapok family, like Ceiba is the kapok tree. And I'll say more about those. But first, this is from the Codex Borgia, Mixtec, 15th century, from this area, north of here. And this is a ceremonial codex, and this is the goddess Xochiquetzal, which is the female counterpart of Xochipilli. She's the princess of flowers, also associated with inebriants, with springtime, with dance, with music, eroticism, all the good things. And so she's sitting on this in a house or on the side of the house, and is clearly sipping one of these cacao potions, because you can see it from the brown froth. And again, you can see that she has this ornamentation, a flower on a headdress. She's the princess of flowers, Xochiquetzal. Quetzal is the name of a very beautiful, colorful bird, which is mostly extinct in this area. And this potion, again, is flavored with flowers, and that's why they depict it with the flowers sticking off. And it may be a compound thing with the flower on the one hand and the mushroom on the other, because you can see the little round dot symbol, which perhaps represents mushroom content, and it's often on the jar or the cup as well. Could I have the next one, please? And when these potions are made this way, they are called, remember I said with the agave potion, this was one of the vehicles, one of 3 vehicles for administering inebriating and other medicinal plants. This other 2 vehicles being the cacao potion and finally tobacco reeds. And I won't talk about tobacco so much at the moment. But in the case of the agave potion, straight it's called octli, or now we say pulque. But when it contained these visionary agents, it was called sochi octli, or the flowery or florid pulque, or it's also teocli, or the wondrous or divine pulque. The same is the case with cacao. When it contains these visionary elements, it's called sochi cacahuatl, or the florid cacao. So we have sochi ocli, the florid ocli, and sochi cacahuatl, the florid cacao. A combination, as I said the other day, seemingly mixed with the agave potion, which has this stick, which I believe represents Acacia angustissimum, the root of which was added and is still called palo de pulque. Next, please. And again, I showed both of these the other day, but I just wanted to show again the contrast between the agave potion, which she has in hand, and the pulque stick that she's putting in it, and then another like to rub it in below. They just show the 2 elements. And then on the side, by comparison, is the cacao potion. And here is a kind of offering. This is also the Nadal Codex, also Mixtec from the 15th century. Next slide, please. So, apropos of these additives, the Tejate potion that I showed, and I'll put another slide in a second, from Oaxaca City Market. This contains particularly this flower, and someone here has some that can be shown around, which is the flower of Quararibea funebris in the Bombaceae, the kapok family. And that man, of course, is Richard Evans Schultes. And I had the good fortune when I was researching my chocolate book, everything must have been lined up right in the ceremonial calendar, because just by chance, I coincided here in Oaxaca with, or first in Mexico City, and we came to Oaxaca together, with both Richard Evans Schultes and Albert Hoffman. And so we came on a brief field trip to look into this Quararibea funebris, because Schultes had written a paper on it in 1958 in the Harvard Botanical Museum leaflets, and it also interested a man named Frederick Rosengarten from the New York Botanical Garden, who then became a consultant for the McCormick Spice Company, and he also wrote a very good paper in that same journal about this potion Tejate and about Quararibea funebris. There was a little bit of, could I have the next slide, please? I think that shows slightly more close-up view. The leaves are quite big, and they generally hang down like this. You can see this, by the way, if you want, because there are 2 villages here in the valley where this is grown for economic purposes. One is El Tule, the village, where the big famous tree is, which is a kind of a cypress tree. And the other one is nearby San Andres Guayapan. And many of the families there just live off of this culture. They have, it's a big, very big, long-lived tree with very hard wood. And the batidor and molinillo that I showed you before was made out of this wood, Quararibea wood. And the trees get so big that one of them will cover an entire house and garden plot. And many of the families there basically live from just one of these trees because the dried flowers are worth as much as processed macadamia nuts. And so they simply dry them and sell them, but it's only an item here in the market here. And in fact, it's very strange because it was once a common rainforest tree here in, well, not so strange, here in Mexico, but because we don't have any rainforest, this is one of the consequences. This tree has been lost. And here in the valley, it's not part of its natural range, but it was evidently taken here and cultivated here and has survived here as a kind of refugium. I've never seen it in the wild in Mexico, although it's still fairly common in Guatemala. It's called funibris, oddly enough, because the type specimen came from a graveyard where it was also planted near the Oaxaca-Puebla border. I don't remember the name of the town. Could I have the next slide, please? And when Rosengarten became interested in it, just to show the post, again, this is the frothing result with the stick and everything of adding this flour dried and ground up. Now, the McCormick Company became interested in it because it is a unique spice and it's a very persistent aroma, although the aroma does change with drying. It changes distinctly, but it still remains a very unique spice, and everyone's always interested in any new and unusual spice, of course. But the McCormick Company found from a survey that there just wasn't enough of it here. There was perhaps in Guatemala, and that cultivation would take too long, and for various reasons they dropped the project. So it never became commercialized, and it's still a possibility. I've always had in mind, and for a while when Dennis McKenna was working for Beta in Minneapolis, he hired me as a consultant in what they called the Aztec Chocolate Project, but he couldn't sell it to the bean counters in the company. He said, this is a soap company, not a chocolate company, and so we don't want a part of it. But the idea was, here Mexico gave chocolate to the world, but they're generally known for pretty lousy chocolates in modern times. And what is called Mexican style here is with cinnamon. And cinnamon, of course, is Asiatic and was brought by the Spaniards. And so the idea was to make a true Mexican style chocolate using some of the original seasonings that were added to it. Besides this one, I don't have photos of, but it's another tree that's in the Ananaceae, like guanabana, like many fruits in the tropics. And this is Symbopetalum penduliflorum, and it has a very almost woody, when dried, flower pod, which is also a unique spice. In fact, it smells and tastes very much like black pepper, fresh black pepper, recently ground, but it is not piquant. It doesn't have any biting, so it would also be a potentially valuable spice. And the idea was to use some of these things and make a modern chocolate, and I may still do that at some point. I also, some years ago, got correspondence from an English couple, and they have a company that makes very good chocolates called Green and Black's, organic chocolates. And they said that they had been in part inspired by my cacao book, the Ruminations of an Unabashed Chocolate Addict, from 1985, to start this company. One of the things they have is a chocolate that they call Mayan Gold, although oddly enough the cover art is not Mayan, it's from Teotihuacan. But it's from their own organic grown cacao from Belize, and it's almost unique. There's someone else that has a chocolate like this now, in that it's really pure. It doesn't have added cacao butter. It's just a high-fat strain of cacao that's grown organically, and so they just sweeten that and flavor that. And they use allspice as a flavoring, but that made in Guatemala, but not here. That's also another oddball item. I think it's also Asiatic, but I don't know. And I'll read you a quote from Sahagún, which expresses this while we get the slide thing taken care of. This is what Sahagún said about cacao. Again, this was in the mid to late 16th century. Cacahuatl. This cacao, when much is drunk, when much is consumed, especially that which is green, which is tender, makes one drunk, takes effect on one, makes one dizzy, confuses one, makes one sick, deranges one. When an ordinary amount is drunk, It gladdens one, refreshes one, consoles one, invigorates one. Thus it is said, I take cacao, I wet my lips, I refresh myself. And Sahagún had also referred to the flower Cacahuatl, which we now know to be Quararibea funebris, as being inebriating in and of itself. He said it takes effect on just like the mushrooms. And so this caused some confusion. People thought, well, maybe fresh green cacao is inebriating, and this has been put to the test by Tim Nab, a Nahua scholar from the National University of Mexico City, with no particular, not even a very stimulating effect, came from taking large amounts of the unroasted seeds. It was thought that it would be the flowers because of this Cacahuatl, but the flowers have also been tested, flowers of Theobroma cacao, and this also didn't give any particularly good inebriating result. And we now know furthermore that Cacahuatl means Borgia funebris. It refers to the tree, and the flower of that tree is called Poyomatli. And Poyomatli, according to Sahagún, Poyomatli may refer to another flower, and there's a little bit of confusion about that, but there's at least one thing that says Poyomatli is the flower of Cacahuatl, or Quararibea funebris. And I mention this because Poyomatli is an unknown floral inebriant from this area. And so it could be this flower, although I have taken fairly large amounts of it without getting any particular effect, Quararibea funebris. And if you make a tea of it, it kind of thickens it up to a sort of gruel that has to be spooned down. But also the Nahua cacao potion, Cacahuatl, was also spooned down. It was thick. It was more like a pudding. And so it doesn't seem to be the case. Other candidates for Poyomatli are the flower that I just mentioned. It's another cacao additive, Symbopetalum penduliflorum in the Ananaceae. And that's called Teonacastli, which means the sacred ear flower. It looks a little bit like an ear, or Xochitl. And so the names also suggest that it's near, that hasn't yet been put to the test. And another possibility that's been suggested is magnolia flower, a particular Magnolia dialbata from Mesoamerica. And there is one report from the Northeast of indigenous use of a snuff by the Rappahannock Indians made from magnolia blossom. And so that's also another possible psychoactive. And I mention these because there are still things to be resolved in this pharmacognosy. There's still work to be done. But we also know that they inserted many other very inebriating, visionary, and theogenic type substances into this cacao potion. And it may well be that Sahagún was not given the full information by his informants when he said this cacao, when much is taken, makes one dizzy, confuses one, makes one drunk. And particularly there's a good amount of evidence that the psilocybin mushrooms were added to these cacao potions. This one in particular, Psilocybe cerulescens. I showed another slide of it the other day, which is the derrumbe mushroom, and this was the first one that Maria Sabina gave to Gordon Wasser. Actually, he collected it and then she officiated. And so the mushrooms is probably not so widely known. They weren't generally eaten here. They were crushed and the juice was drunk. And this is a fairly common phenomenon. The poetry, for example, speaks often of the liquor of the inebriating mushrooms. And it's not liquor in the sense of alcohol, it's just they would be crushed on metate. And this has been observed in modern times, although it's also been observed simply to chew down the mushrooms. In the same way that salvia divinorum can be prepared crushed on metate, and the ololiuki, the morning glory seeds, are also done the same way. They're crushed on metate and then made into an aqueous infusion. And could I have the next slide, please? And so one of the liquors of the inebriating mushrooms was Xochitl, or a visionary cacao potion, which happened to contain this one or another of these mushrooms. This is Psilocybe mexicana, which is one of the more common ones, and it's a small, in the same subgrouping as Liberty Cap, Psilocybe semilanciata. It doesn't particularly blue like cerulescens, as the name suggests. Could I have the next one, please? And this is Psilocybe zapatecori, which is very similar to cerulescens. In fact, it's called derrumbes del agua. It grows out of water. They call them derrumbes because where there's a landslide, these mushrooms grow in disturbed earth. And then when an animal walks across and leaves hoof prints that fill it with water, this fruits out of the water. And in culture, it's only, to my knowledge, been fruited in flooded cultures. It likes the water. And actually, that's a very interesting aspect of it. So mushrooms could certainly explain the citation of Sahagún, because we know that they added the mushrooms to it. And when Pharmahuasca was introduced to Maria Sabina on the night of 29 through 30 June 1955, which he subsequently reported on in Life magazine, she served him a cacao potion beforehand. He remembered this association, and so it was assigned to him of authenticity and tradition. Could I have the next slide, please? Also, as is in the case, remember, these are additives that I also mentioned for the agave potion. And some of them are also put into the tobacco reeds, the 3 different vehicles. Mushrooms were smoked in these tobacco reeds, but that was very likely Amanita muscaria, as I mentioned the other day, which is very active that way. This is Datura stramonium again. They did add Daturas as well to, could I have the next slide, please, and you can see the close-up. They did add different parts of Datura to the cacao potion, usually under the name Tlapato, but also Mishitl, which is another species, Ceraticola. And also, I don't have a slide of it, but the genus Salandra, or the gold cup, which is a climbing vine. It's like a cross between a Datura and a Bruchmansia, but with big golden, widely open flowers. This is still used by the Huichol, who call it Kieri, and they have 2 traditions of visionary shamanism, one that's centered on Hikuri, which is peyote, and the other one is centered on Kieri, which is Salandra gutata, but under the name Tecomasochitl, which is the cup flower, because tecomate is cup, like the toch tecomatl is the rabbit cup, the rabbit vessel for the making the agave. So the Salandra is another solanaceous additive, and these, of course, the psilocybin mushrooms would have added psilocin and psilocybin to the brew, and these would have added visionary tropane alkaloids of the scopolamine type. Next one, please. And this is also an important pre-Columbian visionary plant that is unknown as to its active principle. This is in the Composite, and this is in the genus Tagetes, which is commonly called a marigold. And this is Tagetes lucida. In Nahuatl, it's called Yautli, and this was an important visionary substance. It was also put into the tobacco reeds. It was not, to my knowledge, or it's not recorded, it was added to the agave potion, but it was definitely added also to this cacao potion to make these flowered cacaos, or sochi cacahuatl. And we don't know the active principle, but it is psychoactive. You can buy this in herb markets, and at least by smoking it, it is psychoactive. And it wasn't known to have been smoked in pre-Columbian times, though. In the markets today, they don't call it yautli, they call it pericon. But that's because of that comes from the botanical name hypericon, from some kind of early botanical confusion. Pericon means Iberico, hypericon. And the next slide shows Tagetes erecta, which is in the same genus, and this is a very famous ethnomedicine here, and also ritual flower, which is called Sempoalsochitl. Can somebody put up the next? This is called Sempoalsochitl, or in modern Spanish, Cempasúchil, and this is the Flor de Muerto. This is the flower for the Day of the Dead. And this is especially found in cemeteries, and is very important on the altar table where you have the Dia de los Difuntos, the Day of the Defunct Ones. And oddly enough, this has no reputation in modern times for psychoactivity, but it is also psychoactive. I haven't verified this myself, but I know that to this day the Mije, which are also in Oaxaca down in the northern part of the isthmus, who are known to be like the Huichol, one of the less Christianized and less acculturated indigenous groups surviving here. still use both of these, and they make infusion of the flowers. And so there again, it's the flower, which is the visionary element, and is added into these potions. But this would also have been added to cacao. And this is Central Xochitl in Nahuatl. Could I have the next one, please? And again, we don't know the active principles of these. It's in the sunflower family, Compaciti. And there are other Tagetes, by the way, that are used ethnomedicinally with suggestive psychoactivity in other areas. So here's another subject for bioassay research in natural product chemistry. This again is that Bolivian Caliandra. But Caliandra, under the name Xochitl, which means hair flower or filamentous flower, was also used in the cacao potion and was also added to the tobacco reeds and as well to the agave potion. So in this case, you see this one in all three of the vehicles. We don't know either what the active principle would have been in particular. At least a couple of different species would have been used here of Caliandra. This is in the leguminosae. And here as additives and as psychotropic substances. They are also, as I mentioned, added to ayahuasca potions in South America by the Shuar, who are also called the Jibaro. They use probably two different species, Samiki and Chingiata, of which we now know to be Caliandras. And I was told once by a very capable Shuar shaman that it was used in exchange with a leaf to provide a similar effect, which is called Diplopteris cabrerana in the Malpighiaceae, which is a DMT-containing leaf from the same family as ayahuasca. They used to be called Banisteriopsis rosbiana. And so it would make sense, because the leguminosae contains a lot of DMT sources, that this might be a DMT source for this potion, or some active tryptophan. And so Caliandra we also have to add to the list. Could I have the next slide, please? And this is, of course, Piper oratum, or it's known as acuyo, mostly in Mexico today. We've probably been served this in food, either in a green salsa or some kind of dish, because it's a very commonly used seasoning. But this is in the Piperaceae. This is a true pepper. Like the black pepper is Piper nigrum, and the cava pepper is Piper mephisticum, and the betel pepper is Piper betel, which is chewed within the palm's nut betel, Areca catechin. But it's not so widely known that this is also a shamanic plant and a potentially visionary plant. A very good source of saffron and isosafrole, but mostly saffrole. And a friend of mine has bioassayed that in the significant dose, and it is very much of a trip. It's very much of a psychoactive. And it can also be used as a precursor for making MDA-type compounds. But this is called Xochitl in Nahuatl, which means the record flower. And again, these things, it's prominent here, but these things are called flowers in this context because that means they're a visionary substance. So it's the leaf that's used. And this has a story and long association with shamanism. There are other pipers, like in South America, that are used as snuffs and substitutes for tobacco or as additives to tobacco. They're also used in dart poisons, also used as fish bait. In fact, in Panama, there's even an intriguing report where they would bait traps, and then once they caught the fish, they would fatten them up in a holding pond and feed them on this, and they got a pre-seasoned fish fillet because it would absorb enough of the saffron. Whereas here, they normally wrap the fish in this leaf and bake it, and sometimes tamal is done that way. So this is very likely would have been due to the saffron content, why it was put into Xochicacahua. Could I have the next one, please? And I put this in because now I want to talk about a little bit about some correspondences with South American shamanism. There is also an additive to cacao that hasn't been yet documented in Mexico, properly speaking, but in Central America, which is a Virola species, and that is Virola guatemalensis. And it probably at one time at least grew in Mexico. But it is definitely added to these cacao potions. And by the way, the Quararibea flower also is added in cacao potions in Central America. And in South America, Quararibea is also associated with cacao. And so I'll say a little bit more about that later. And so this Virola guatemalensis is very interesting because on the one hand you have Virola surinamensis is an additive to different Benistereopsis or ayahuasca type potions, especially in Peru. But the Virola species, the barks, and all I have is the bark of it in the back there. I don't have any other photo of it, and that Virola bark, that's Anandra leaf. And this is tryptamine, that's actually DMT on parsley, and those are standard 100 milligram tryptamine joints for bioassays. That's a good dose, by the way, 100 milligrams on parsley. And so the Virola, though, is a very potent source, not of DMT, but of 5-methoxy-DMT, which is much more potent and for me, more pleasant, more enjoyable, and about 5 times the potency. So it may be, I've always been looking for tryptamine, short-acting tryptamines in Mesoamerica, because one of the odd things is that the Nahua speakers were great experts on this, of about a dozen different categories of chemical pharmacological categories of visionary substances that we know to be used in world shamanism, speaking in terms of chemical pharmacological categories. Representatives of about 7 or 8 of them were here just in this one culture, more than half. But a strong distinction between Mesoamerica and South America is the importance of the short-acting tryptamine in South America. And by the way, it's 5-methoxy-DMT and bufotenine, not DMT. That's not important in any snuff or other plant that we know about. More 5-methoxy and bufotenine. Bufotenine is 5-hydroxy-DMT. And 5-methoxy is O-methylbufotenine or 5-methoxy-DMT. DMT occurs in this, with many, like in Virola and also in Anandra, but generally really low amounts, and it's less potent, so it's not really a significant factor, but everyone's mostly fixated on DMT. So the fact that this Virola thing crosses over into the cacao in Mesoamerica was intriguing, and it may represent an introduction of the short-acting tryptamine to this potion. 5-methoxy-DMT is quite active orally without any monoamine oxidase inhibitor. It just takes a slightly higher dose, but at 30 milligrams and above, it's active by itself. And interestingly enough, this Virola guatemalensis that's put as an additive to the cacao potion is called cacao volador. There's a lot of linguistic crossover between these different shamanic plants. Those that are major vehicles of inebriation, those that are additives to those, and those that are ashes, burned to make ashes. They're all the same shamanic plants that figure, because ashes figure in many of these preparations, especially the snuffs. And they all turn out to be shamanic plants, and there's a lot of linguistic crossover. So as I say, this Virola, which Virolas are usually called generically kumalas in South America, which is a Quechua word, big forest trees, and it's the inner bark, or exudate of the inner bark, that is then processed down to make a snuff, which is just a blood red exudate that comes from heating this bark, which is scraped up and dried and powdered. It's also used as dart poison, and in some areas, some cultures of the Waikam, or the so-called Yanomamo type groups, there's no distinction between snuff and dart poison. They don't make the snuff, they literally scrape their dart points, which are slivers of bamboo, in this exudate on the standing tree after pulling the bark down, and then they smoke it and they coat it over and over again. And each of these darts can contain as much as 10 milligrams of 5-methoxy-DMT, which is a very good dose snuffed, and a very good dose inhaling the vapor, and sublingually, subcutaneously probably also. And in the next slide I show the way the Waika used this. And they use a serbatana, which is what we call a blowgun. And these are also shamanic. The hunting blowgun is generally that size or larger, but these are also made out of virolas, out of that family, Myristicaceae, some other shamanic plant. And it's called a taboka, this device, and that's where the name, it's a snuff tube really, and that's where the name for tobacco comes from by linguistic confusion. And they're generally, as I said, made out of one of these shamanic trees, a Virola or an Erianthus species. And so it's, in this case, among the Waika, they're used to blast the snuff into each other's nostrils, this much, 2 hands full, one at a time. And they do it, this is not shamanic, they do it just for pure entertainment every day when they have it. And the shamans also use it, but what we're seeing here is not shamanic. They do this, and then when they come out of the stupor, they like to do wrestling matches and stage mock warfare, and this is what the men do for entertainment. Could I have the next slide, please? And to talk a little bit about some of these South American connections, again with the Virola, that Virola guatemalensis that is added to cacao is called cacao volador. But on the other hand, you have a couple of South American cacao species that are called Virola, they're called Kumala. And so as I say, there's all this linguistic crossover between these. In particular, this one, which I just have the flower, this is Herrania breviligulata, which is a wild cacao type species in the Sterculiaceae. And this is an important one because the Shuar, the Jiva, also add this to Banistriopsis brew, which they of course don't call ayahuasca, they call natem or natema. And so you find this, the cacao species also entering into the South American Banistriopsis complex. Not only that, but the Virola preparations, you have 2 different kinds. You have the snuff, and one example of that is the first one. By the way, Schultes was the one who, quote unquote, discovered this Virola snuff, and only in the 1950s. We can find no documentation of this in the colonial records except for possibly as a short-acting dark poison, because now we know that it is a dark poison. And from Colombia and Brazil, there are 2 reports from the 16th century of an inebriating, non-fatal dark poison that just knocked people out for a little while, and then they got out with no after effect a little bit later. And so I think that was probably this Virola paste, but we're not sure. And in one of the areas, that Virola inebriant is called Kamalampi, and that could be Kumala Ampi. Ampi is curare, dark poison, and Kumala is Virola. So it's kind of another mysterious inebriant, this Kumalampi, but it very likely is this Virola resin. So, but in the Tucano area in southern Colombia, where Schultes found this Virola resin snuffed, it was called yaqui or yato, and it consisted of 50% of this dried red exudate. It's really blood red, and 50% ashes, and it was the ashes of cacao. It was, in that case, it was not Herrania, but it was Theobroma subincanum, the bark, the ash of the bark, 50-50. And then some of these groups, especially in that area, but not related to Tucano, with one exception, like the Bora and Muinane, Witoto, which is another linguistic group, they also make, or apparently did make, a Virola inebriant, and this is also another ethnobotanical mystery, because this likewise was discovered by Schultes and only in the 1970s. And in this case, they made little pellets of this resin, and the pellets were always coated in ash, and one of the most important ash sources for that was the husk of cacao fruits, and also of the bark of this species, to make these little pellets. And they were said in the literature to be for oral ingestion, but Dennis McKenna later bioassayed these and didn't find that to be the case. Didn't find them to be active and very toxic to him. Even he analyzed them also, and even ones that contained significant amounts of 5-methoxy-DMT, but not as much as I found to be the the oral threshold. I think they were made for sublingual ingestion. These particular pellets, and they coated them in the cacao ash just to make them easy to handle and not sticky. These resins are also used in ethnomedicine, like rubbed on the gums to cure problems there. Now, there's another example of cacao used in an association with inebriants among the Cuna of Panama, which is also not so acculturated a group. And in this case, they would get together, and we're using tobacco as a primary major shamanic ingredient, and they would get together in a pretty well-closed hut and put bundles of tobacco on open fires and burn it, or alternatively, they would use this tube method and blow the smoke onto each other, because these tubes also are sometimes packed with tobacco, and then a coal is put in it, and then the coal end is put in the mouth of some of the Schwarz do this too, and then the smoke is blown into or onto a person for various curative purposes and also for inebriation. So while they're blowing each other to bits with this tobacco smoke, they have braziers around, and then they put dried cacao beans and also dried chile onto these braziers, and that's really hairy. And so they're having the smoke from the chile or capsicum, which contains an alkaloid called capsaicin, in the air while they're doing this tobacco ingestion, which goes on sometimes for days. One time in the Mazatec country in 1975, I had this mushroom session with kind of, not a real shame of this, maybe the son of one who was given to catering to the tourist trade. And he, one of the things he did really made my hair stand on end, but he was in, normally the mushrooms might be sensed with copal, some kind of a resinous incense, on braziers, but this guy did it with pure dried chile seco, dried cacao palms, and so he broke them up and stuffed them on, and not only did he sense the mushrooms, but he hyperventilated this smoke for about a minute, like this, and I was choking on the floor with my head, it was like opening 5 bottles of fuming nitric acid and ammonium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid. I really couldn't breathe it. But this guy was hyperventilating. Chile is also a real shamanic ingredient. And so that's another example involving cacao. And so also with the tobacco snuffs, there are many examples of different species using the ash from, the ash from the husks of Theobroma subincanum to mix with tobaccos. The snuffs usually have a basic consistency, chemically basic, and they mix ash with them. Theobroma bicolor is also used, and then there's even a modern mestizo report of from Guyana of some blacks. They're like caboclos, they were called in Brazil. Guyanese that make a tobacco snuff from ordinary cigarettes. They just take it apart and they stick the free tobacco in their palms, and then they use the wood, the ash from burning wood of a sterculia, of some tree in this cacao family, and then they do this and they kind of squeeze out the liquid and they snuff that. So again, this cacao connection passes over into a more modern form. Then you have the case of the Virola pellets, these mysterious pellets, and it's mysterious because we've never seen the shamanic use of them. Schultes learned this from these Bora and Watoto people that were living in another area from their ancestral area, and they said that their fathers and grandfathers did this, and they knew which trees, they knew how to make it, but they didn't know precisely which species were used for it. They'd lost the tradition. So Schultes had them make it from every myristicaceous tree, Virolas and other genera, that they could find, and then analyze them for tryptamines. But I think they were sublingual pellets, or they were made to stick in the nose, because snuffs can also be solids, or liquids, powders, solids, or vapors. There are 4 different classes of snuffs. We also have the ethereal lines, which are vapors, but there's at least tobacco pellet snuff is known from Brazil, where they would make these tobacco pellets and stuff it in the nose. Okay, so in this, there's also tobacco paste, which is called ambida or ambil. Ambida is called by the Witoto in this same area. They make these Virola paste. And it crosses all the way over Colombia to the northernmost part, to a linguistically unrelated group, the Kogi are the most famous ones. And they also make this tobacco paste and have a similar mythology, which is just fascinating around it. But they call it by almost the same name. They just call it ambil or ambida, the 2 names. And the Witoto also call it yera. Well, this also has ashes from, in this case, that very plant, Urania breviligulata. And then they will sometimes carry the ambil, this tobacco paste, which is rubbed on the gums, just like the Virola resin, in a cacao gourd. Could I have the next slide, please? I guess I'm going to have to move along quickly. I'll just mention apropos, but tobacco paste and ayahuasca type brews also It's little known that Banisteriopsis is added to snuffs and also added to tobacco paste. I think this is much older than the potions that everyone's so familiar with, and the name ayahuasca is clearly colonial, it's clearly post-Columbian, and I think that's a recent phenomenon, maybe even just a few hundred years old, of making these composite potions that Luis Eduardo Luna has studied so much. But the Banisteriopsis goes way back in Colombia as additives to tobacco and also to these snuff plants of different types. And this has been found among various groups. Okay, I just put this here to make the relationship that these cacao potions are rather like the Banisteriopsis potion. That we know not just, I've enumerated a dozen or so of presumptive or known visionary plants that are added to the cacao potions, but just a cursory reading of Hernandez or Sahagún, you will find many, many others. And so you can see it as a vehicle, an ethnomedicinal vehicle for administration of many kinds of medicines, not just psychotropic ones, and that's the same thing that what we call ayahuasca is. Many of the ayahuasca groups are not visionary, and they're designed to cure specific diseases, and we know about 100 different plants that are added to those. Could I have the next slide, please? And so I'm going to read a little thing in the end, if you'll permit me, that summarizes all these connections. It took me a couple of months and about an ounce and a half of cocaine to get this thing all straight. It was really complicated, and the best thing I can do, and I'll just confuse it if I try to make all these conclusions. But I just wanted to say, apropos of the pharmacology of cacao, it's principally contains xanthine alkaloids. And here you see the three principal xanthines: caffeine, which is trimethylxanthine, and theophylline and theobromine are dimethylxanthines, and are positional isomers of each other. Next slide, please. Theobromine is really the major component. Caffeine is comparatively minor. It's maybe as much as 10-to-1 difference or 5-to-1 in different cacao products. Theobromine has less of a central stimulating effect and more of a cardiac stimulatory effect. And can I have the last slide?
What is the name of that book? Cacao and Chocolate. What is the verbiage underneath that?
It is on the bibliography. I put about 50 copies of a brief bibliography back there. It's by a man named Knapp from the 30s. It's a very good book about it's called The Cacao and Chocolate. The Cocoa and Chocolate. Their History from Plantation to Consumer by Knapp. Okay, could I have the last slide, please? And I just put this to show the cacao's love drug, and it was, of course, said to be an aphrodisiacal potion that Moctezuma used when he went to visit his harem. He took especially cacao, but we don't know what seasonings it had in it. But of course, it is very much associated, even among us, as being a love drug. And theobromine has been shown to be a very potent aphrodisiac in hornets, at least. It hasn't been extensively tested in human beings. And of course, since I wrote the book, and I have to update this part of it, we now know also that we have this particular probable neurotransmitter, arachidonyl ethanol amide, or anandamide, which is the ligand for the THC, for a receptor in the brain to which THC binds from cannabis. That also occurs in cacao, probably in sub-psychoactive amounts, but anandamide itself, to my knowledge, has not been bioassays for psychoactivity in human beings. And that's another desideratum of this area. It's also, there's talk of phenethylamine in cacao, although that's ambiguous evidence. There apparently is not as much of it as has been said, but there's probably been some work since I wrote this book, and I haven't looked at that. But it is presumed by many people to be a potent source of phenethylamine, which has some mood-altering effects. And I'll just mention briefly before reading this that I was told here that it's also now known to have monoamine oxidase inhibiting effects, but I haven't actually seen that particular work. So this is from, I'll conclude with this. This is from my snuff book, which is called Shamanic Snuffs or Entheogenic Orions. It's kind of a limited edition, handmade. And actually this was published in John Hanna's Entheogen Review. But it summarizes as the last of a series of vignettes that I wrote to try and make some provocative suggestions about shamanism and also to show all these connections. It's called Cacao Volador, from Amazonia to Aztlan. We have seen that two species of Virola and one of Erianthera, a related genus, might be called cacaos in South America, and it comes as no surprise that seeds of Virola guatemalensis, or Cacao Volador, are used for flavoring chocolate potations in Central America. I'll skip over because that's about the origin of the plant. I wish to note some South American linguistic crossovers involving cacaos. Pake many books, including my own. Cacao appears not to be of Mayan Mesoamerican derivation, the word cacao, inasmuch as the root is found in Tupi Guarani languages for Theobroma cacao and Theobroma speciosum, along with the roots for other cacao terms, such as cupui for T. subincanum, cupuaçu for T. grandiflorum. The Mesoamerican name for Theobroma bicolor, pataste, or Cacahuatl in Nahuatl, exists through Central America all the way to Ecuador as patasi in the Rio Napo, although in this latter case it is less clear in which direction this phoneme migrated. Inasmuch as T. cacao is of South American origin and immemorial association with humankind there, logic dictates the Mesoamericans derived their words, Cacahuatl Nahuatl, from Tupi Guarani and not conversely. We've seen intimate relationships between cacaos as snuff, tobacco, and coca ash sources. I didn't mention the coca part for lack of time. And that both Virola and Eschweileria, another important ash source species, are called cacaos. Significantly, two species of Malpighiaceae, the family of Banisteriopsis, are called liana cacao, cacao liana in the Caribbean. Two Banisteriopsis species are also named Wilca bejuco, Vilca liana, which associates them with another snuff plant. And theobromine, Vilca, while the Colombian Piptidenia is known as chocolatillo. Piptidenia is the presumptive genus of this bufotenine snuffs. Some of them are piptidinias. So one of those is called little chocolate. And theobromine, in fact, occurs in Piptidenia leptostachya. Quararibea cacao and Quararibea cordata, Bombaceae, bear names relating to cacao in Colombia and Brazil, such as cacao cimarron and cupuaçu. This is significant since Quararibea funebris is called cacahuatl or cacao flower in Mesoamerica. Its aromatic flowers still used as additives to chocolate in Oaxaca. I've noted the importance of lupuna bombaceae, both as tobacco and ayahuasca plants in Amazonia. In Mesoamerica, Quararibea funebris flowers seasoned both tobacco reeds for smoking and orally ingested cacao potions. And the Central American species, Quararibea fieldii, madre de cacao, known as maja in Mayan, is also still used as spice in chocolate. Furthermore, Lupuna blanca, Ceiba pentandra, very important in South American shamanism and hunting technology, Pochocl and Nahuatl, was likewise added to Cacahuatl in Mesoamerica and probably also to ayahuasca in Peru. Lupuna blanco was also used in a potion called chocoyatl, whence something derived our word chocolate. This comes from Hernandez, that chocoyatl was ceiba with cacao. An obscure Shipibo additive to Nishioni or ayahuasca in Peru, Ispingo or Ispinku or Espingo, is probably the seeds of a species of Quararibea, used like Vilca seeds as Peruvian additives to chicha, called yale, again relating it to the agave potion. Here, chicha is another fermented drink, which contains many visionary additives. Quararibea putumayensis is a Cofana curare plant, fruits of Bombaceae patinoa, ichthyotoxica, a ticuna fish poison, which is commonly called cupuaçu rana, false cupuaçu being this cacao name for grandiflorum in Brazil. I've noted that in Mesoamerica, cacahuatl, or cacao potions, constituted a sort of ayahuasca analog. Like ayahuasca, cacahuatl was an all-purpose pharmaceutical vehicle for administration of many medicinal plants, both curative specifics and shamanic inebriants. Besides seeds of pochoclo, Ceiba pantandra, flowers of the related Quararibea funibris, and seeds of Virola guatemalensis, Mesoamerican cacao brews at times contained psilocybin mushrooms, teonanacatl, flowers of solandra, tecomasochitl, or datura, mixitl, Tagetes flowers, yautli and sempoalsochitl, and piper leaves, mecasochitl, all visionary agents, as well as some probable entheogens, including flowers of a caliandra species called Xilosochitl, Symbopetalum penduliflorum, teonacastli, and Magnolia dialbata, Elosochitl. The epigram introducing this chapter indicates that many such flowers were also additives to Cacahuatl tobacco reeds, Quararibea, Piper, Symbopetalum, Tagetes, and some species of visionary mushrooms. But Mesoamericans had still another class of ayahuasca analog, alcoholic chichas, known as balche in Mayan, and octli and nahuatl, or pulque. In both cases, many visionary additives were involved, but it is significant that the primary and definitive additive in each was leguminous. The Mayan meathglin, or medicated mead, is named for the balche tree, Loncocarpus violaceus, whose bark was fermented with water and stingless bee honey. By the same token, Mesoamerican fermented octli from sweet saps of agave with ocapatli roots, or the octli drug, from the leguminous tree Acacia angustissima, and also the roots of Caliandra anomala, still called palo de pulque, or pulque tree, in Zapotec. And this was the first Mesoamerican entheogen to be prescribed by the Spaniards by royal decree in 1529, 42 years before the Holy Office of the Inquisition was constituted, and 91 years before the more famous peyote and kindred entheogens were decreed heretical. Balche in the Mayan area and octli, ocapatli in highland Mesoamerica were clearly the most common everyday working class entheogens at the time of conquest. We found that in South America, species of acacia were involved in the Jordema complex, while species of Loncocarpus may be fish poisons and Gudarte additives. Not only did cacao and live shamanic plants spread by trade to Mesoamerica in pre-contact times, but we descried strong parallels between Mesoamerican and South American ethnopharmacognosy. In both cases, leguminosae and sterculiaceae, cacao family, are central elements. Tobacco is intimately intercalated, and the Bombaceae, especially Quararibea species, are inextricably related to cacaos. Virola is an additive both to ayahuasca and cacao potions, besides being itself a major snuff plant, and we see common additives in other families, including Boraginaceae, Compositae, Piperaceae, and Solanaceae. Andean San Pedro cactus has its pharmacognostical equivalent in the Mesoamerican peyote cactus, both inseparably interrelated with tobacco, like ayahuasca and cacahuatl potions. The last, taken during feasts, accompanied by smoking Cacahuatl tobacco reeds, potions and reeds containing many of the same entheogenic admixtures, mostly having direct parallels in South American snuffs, ipadu coca, and tobacco additives, in each of which cacaos are key. Not only are we faced with a pan-South American complex of shamanic inebriation, but this includes also Mesoamerica in its prodigious pharmacognostical purview, with roots dating back at least 3 millennia. Moreover, the shamanic pharmacognosy extends northward via tobacco, peyote, datura, far into North America, where earliest human uses of the first two likely took place, whereas Amanita muscaria, primal entheogen of Beringian groups who first migrated into Neogea decades of millennia ago, plates and interweaves the whole, with far more archaic roots in Siberia. Thank you. I'll take questions. Yes, please.
I was wondering, all the things that I've read from South America to Central America up into the Mexican area is that they always fermented some type of corn, hot pepper, and one of these flowers to make a beverage from cacao. And in doing that, in our residence in the States, it's actually got a very extreme psychoactive response in the system. The spice and
with corn chicha, maize chicha.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, for example, in the north, that's pretty common. That's a very restricted practice in Mesoamerica, but it is more north-central Mexico. The chicha de maíz is much more common in South America, especially the northern part. But this is generally with chewed or malted maize kernels, and this is generically called chicha. Of course, it also has many additives, and it's very similar. But for example, where it is used in Mesoamerica, it's called tesguino, and it's mainly by groups like the Tarahumara or the Huichol. And they also make agave potions, and they use similar additives, one of which is peyote. But I don't know about chile as an additive to that. You said they use chile as well.
Right, exactly, ají. It's very strong, and the frothier it gets, the stronger it is.
Yeah, I mean, I consider ají or chile to be a shamanic inebriant, especially after seeing that hair-raising thing in the Mazatecs with the burning chile pots, but that's an archaic thing because it's known in other areas, burning chile on open braziers, and tobacco also. Yes?
I was wondering if you could comment on the presence of tyramine in fermented dry cacao, but not in fresh cacao and fresh fruit, and its relationship to problems with ayahuasca or ayahuasca analogs, in the sense that tyramine can interfere with the, I believe it's beta-carbolines in the typical ayahuasca brew.
Yeah, well, tyramine, I don't have any ready recent data at hand on tyramine in cacao, though I know it occurs. But on the other hand, I don't think there's been a lot of polemic about this serotonin effect and so forth. And I have maintained, and I think history has borne me out from the very start, that there's such a fundamental difference between the short-acting, comparatively weak monoamine oxidase inhibitors that are used in these potions, which are beta-carbolines, like harmine especially, and secondarily harmine, and the ones that are used in medicine. The effect is so fleeting in this case, and much less potent. I don't think that this is a problem at all, to have any dietary restrictions. And the dietary restrictions that are associated with ayahuasca in South America are no different from what you would find with mushrooms here, or peyote there, or tobacco there. It's for spiritual reasons. I don't think tyramine is a problem in the case of beta-carbolines, but certainly if people are taking monoamine oxidase inhibitors on prescription, some of which are irreversible inhibitors like isocarboxazide, one would want to be careful. And they do recommend not to use chocolate products or anything theobromine or xanthine containing. Yes?
Hello, this is working good. Jonathan, I have a two-part question. One was, what year did you go to Oaxaca with Dick Schultes and Albert Hoffman to study Quararibea libris? And
82 or 83, about.
82, 83, okay.
Yeah.
And the second part is, what is the nature of the psychoactive activity of Tagetes lucida and Tagetes erecta?
It's one of the classic marijuana substitutes. You fire up a joint and you get a buzz. But it's nothing dramatic. But yeah, I would say, in a way, kind of cannabis-like. It's not salvia-divinorum-like, that's for sure, or tryptamine-like. It's more of a relaxing effect, but it is definitely, it's kind of like smoking Artemisia leaf. If you smoke Fujon-rich plants, and it's very aromatic, it may be some aromatic substance, but this is, even the dried leaves are aromatic, but it has a very strong anise-like smell. And so it could be some aromatic compound. And there is a thesis from the 1960s, I think, where they did a bioassay snuffing it, which was unusual. They chopped up the leaf and so forth, because they did notice these psychoactive references to it. And for some reason they decided to snuff it. In the case of, these aren't known as snuffs, and snuffing is not dry snuffing, not widely known in Mesoamerica, just tobacco, and that's hardly only mentioned once for medicinal purposes. But there is one report of Itzauyahu, which is Artemisia leaf. That would have been Artemisia mexicana, or it's also called estafiate or ajenco, which means like wormwood. that was powdered up and thrown in the face of sacrificial victims, so that it was said supposedly so they would become insensitized or whatever, which sounds a little bit like, you know, a snuff blown in, but that's the closest we can come to it. But that wasn't the Tagetes. So these guys tried a basic snuff, and they said it irritated like hell and was a great sternutatory or sneezing powder, niespulver. But on the other hand, they didn't find it to be especially psychoactive. But he did say that a couple of his students did a lot of it, or something like that. He made some comment like they did, or something, and they seemed to become fond of it. So I haven't tried it except by smoking, and I haven't tried the Senpao Solchito at all. Yes.
Would you think there's not really then a problem with people who are taking antidepressants and taking ayahuasca? A lot of people are like demanding.
You mean if they're taking monoamine oxidase inhibitors?
No, like serotonin.
I don't really think that's going to be a major problem. But on the other hand, there are a couple of reports that people that take some of those, I don't know if it's from the report of Prozac, but certainly for medicinal monoamine oxidase inhibitors, that they become completely insensitized to psilocybin and LSD, or they have to take 10 times more to get the same effect. Remember the ayahuasca effect. This is something that's caused a lot of confusion, and it still hasn't been dispelled. And I maintained this from the very beginning and was criticized at first by some of my colleagues, like Jace Calloway and Dennis McKenna, but they had themselves adduced results that supported this view, that the ayahuasca effect is strictly peripheral. It's not in the brain. And it's only to get it past get it absorbed into the bloodstream and prevent the deamination of the compounds in the gut. And in the brain, its effect is negative. It's not an enhancing effect. It's an effect that works. It's an anti-DMT effect. Beta-carboline, for example, is a Valium-like compound. Indeed, there is a receptor that's called the GABA-A receptor. And one of the subunits of that is called the benzodiazepine receptor, where compounds like diazepam, desmethyldiazepam, all of these benzodiazepines bind. No one has yet found that the anxiolytic or anxiety-releasing or dissolving ligand of that receptor, but two compounds are known to be anxiogenic ligands of that receptor, and one of them is a beta-carboline. We know that that's also a beta-carboline site. And if you take, as I have, very large amounts of beta-carbolines, it's very much like Valium. And if I take Valium, it will knock out even a good dose of LSD. And so there are several reasons you could conjecture, but the MAO in any case in the brain is not in the synapses where you have this receptor site interaction. It's inside the nerve cells for processing cellular compounds that are outside the vesicles, inside the cells. That's where the MAO is, not in the synapse. And so if you introduce another indole like a beta-carboline, and that gets high enough levels in the brain to where it might be in the synapses, that's going to compete against the tryptamines for access to these receptor sites. And it's also going to activate this GABA-A receptor, which is a depolarization receptor. It causes a flood of chloride ions, which depolarizes the membrane and turns down its sensitivity by 2 orders of magnitude or something. And so the general effects of what you want is you want to take only enough of the beta-carboline and at the same time as the tryptamine to enhance the uptake. In the case of mushrooms, for example, some people will take an extract of rich in beta-carbolines like pregonum seed with the mushrooms and claim that it enhances the effect. Well, what you're getting there is more absorption, again, in the stomach. So you don't want to be able to feel this in the head, because that means there's this inhibitor up there that's going to inhibit the DMT or the 5-methoxy or whatever. And so I went from the ayahuasca analogs. In this snuff book, there's a different technology described, because the beta-carbolines are also, the huasca vine is also used with these snuffs, and I think that's the primordial use. In that case, you do get enhancement. You get double the potency, and you need about more than 10 times less of the dose. And the dose is so small to enhance the tryptamines in the nose that you can't feel it in your brain. It doesn't build up brain levels there to compete. And so, where, for example, 10 milligrams of 5-methoxy-DMT snuffed is very active by itself, if you take 5 milligrams with 5 milligrams of harmine or harmaline, it's the same effect that you get with 10 milligrams approximately, and this has been verified in other people. So there's still a lot of confusion about this MAO inhibiting thing, and I don't know about that in relation to cacao. It wouldn't be surprising. And there are these reports with these MAO inhibitors that people that have these high blood levels of them from taking them every day in psychiatry just becoming sensitized. No one's reported enhanced effects with these things, but often very, very attenuated. Yes, any other? Yeah, back there.
Have you ever tried smoking beta-carbolines to pre-dose before taking tryptamines?
No. I only model things that are like shamanic practices. I don't know of any practice that would be like that, and so I haven't.
Okay. It sounds like based on the explanation you're giving that it would inhibit the effect. Is that correct? I mean, am I understanding your
a tryptamine-like effect, I would think, yes, but we don't even know if the beta-carbolines survive intact, that kind of process of vaporization. They may even be altered into some other compound.
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Okay. Well, I know experientially, I know people who've done that, and smoking, for instance, ground up Syrian rue before smoking DMT. It seems to stretch out the DMT a little bit more. I mean, this is...
I know, I've heard this kind of thing from many people, but no one's ever given me any kind of hard enough data that had even minimal control. So it's kind of a tricky thing to do this in a way that you get some useful information. There is very useful information to be got, and I don't mean to deprecate this kind of research. I think it's a very valuable, and there's an important place for it, and it's indispensable in this particular field of visionary compounds. But in both my ayahuasca book and snuff book, which are kind of like two parts of the same study, I talk quite a bit about how to make this methodology rigorous so that you get information. You want to only use threshold level doses, because that's a threshold level for a particular thing which is rare in me, like visual effects. And so that is repeatable, that I can recognize again the next time, whereas if I take double that, how do I know that is that twice that or 2.5 times that? Or it's very vague, but that's kind of a repeatable thing. So if I establish that 10 milligrams is that visual threshold, and then I get that with 5 milligrams with this booster, that's something that is more or less reliable. Whereas if I took 20 and that worked, but I wasn't looking for the threshold. I first looked for the threshold, something that's a repeatable, a signpost, shall we say. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Maybe we can talk to the FDA about setting up some controlled studies and,
Yeah, well, and I have published 3 parts, and there's the fourth part is coming, of essentially bioassay pharmacology in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, which is like a hippie drug abusology journal. But it is a medical journal, and it is indexed, Index Medicus, and so forth. But the first one was called Pharmahuasca, and it was modeling with pure tryptamines and pure beta-carbolines, what I call the ayahuasca effect. Then the second one was with bufotenine, with 5-hydroxy-DMT, which I isolated from anadenanthra and compared bioacid anadenanthra snuff, and then the pure compounds with and without tryptamines by different routes, including intranasal, sublingual, oral with MAO inhibitors, and intrarectal, and pulmonary, because anadenanthra is also smoked. And then I did the same thing. That second paper is called Pharmanyoko, and then the Pharmapena one is with 5-methoxy-DMT. And the fourth part is on nicotine. And I still have yet to complete the nicotine bioassays with beta-carbolines. But that's sublingual nicotine. And I didn't get any trouble from them on publishing this. In fact, the strangest thing happened when I sent in the Pharmanyoko paper. It was like a hot potato. They didn't answer me for a long time. They didn't say anything about the Pharmahuasca paper, but a couple of years went by, and that was when they were debating that stupid methamphetamine bill that originally had an anti-press provision that didn't make any distinction between commercial and scientific press. So, oddly enough, this never happened to me before. I got 2 reviews back, and one of them was like 3 pages and very detailed, and it wasn't critical at all. It really said this is, and it was from some straight pharmacologist, this is important information and it's adequate methodology. But they wanted me to add things to it. They usually want you to take stuff out. And this is the first time they'd ever asked me to add like 20% more text to the paper. But they wanted me to justify the ethics of self-experimentation and compare in human beings and compare and contrast it with animal research. And so I did that, and I think they wanted to cover their ass and also establish some kind of a framework for this. So I would say that's enough. That establishes it well enough. So then I sent them another one, which was an even bigger hot potato, and they accepted this with some trepidation. But that's on withdrawal bioassays, where I have a methodology for completely eliminating physical tolerance and withdrawal syndrome from opiates, which I take all the time anyway. And so nobody since De Quincey has published withdrawal bioassays. And so there are 2 case reports where I withdraw from lengthy opioid habits, which were always oral with known doses, so that I have a track record for it, and give the withdrawal results of that. And it's the first symptom-free withdrawal that's ever been reported. So that's going to soon be published in the JVD too. So that's also pretty, it's pushing it even farther. And so I think it's very important. And for some time I wrote a column in Spain called the Catholic Psychonautics, Catholic in the sense of universal. And it was basically about that, really showing the importance, not just historically, but conceptually, of human self-experiments. And ethics dictate that the researcher himself do this, as Sasha and Ann have also pointed out in a very clear and unambiguous and excellent fashion. Okay, one other question? Yeah.
Theobroma subincanum is something you mentioned.
Yeah.
The spelling of that, and then another question is, you hear about these wild tobaccos, Nicotina rustica, for example, having MAO inhibitors. What is the MAO inhibitor chemical?
It's nicotine, but it's MAOB. But it's a very significant MAOB inhibitor. And Banisteriopsis bark, incidentally, this is the first report that we have of that being smoked in South America. But Schultes reported that these same Bora and Witoto that have this 2-generation gap between their grandfathers who knew all this stuff and they just kind of remember but are vague on the details. They said that they made spliffs out of heliconia flowers, which is a musaceae, like a banana family, famous ornamental flowers. The heliconia leaf, they made a spliff with tobacco and Banisteriopsis bark, or would smoke the bark by itself, and some leaf. And by the way, that's another interesting thing about Banisteriopsis, is the leaf. The names refer to the leaf. The etymologies that have been proposed for things like kakaki, yahe. Yahe is specifically the name of the leaf in many languages. And it's very clear that the leaves, we only have one analysis, but the leaves are much, much more rich in alkaloids than the stem bark or the stem is. And there are only a couple of reports of people putting leaves symbolically into the brews, but at some time the leaves were the important part of the Banisteriopsis, and it's gravitated to the stems. It's maybe because of the male-female dichotomy. The leaf additive is the female and the stem is the male, but that's the case.
And then the spelling for the other.
Oh, sorry, subincanum. Theobroma subincanum. It's an important shamanic one, yeah.
Just a quick question. And have you tried cacao before, where you've taken it, the purple fresh pods out of the white, blended it up in a blender, and just consumed that rich purple drink?
No.
I would suggest it at some point. I mean, I've suggested it to many people, but it's very interesting because it's very psychedelic. It makes you extremely sensitive.
What do you mean that it's very psychedelic?
It's very psychedelic in the fact that it sort of puts you in a place where you feel like it's almost like at the pre-LSD, where you start to feel like you're being embodied.
But it's not going to replace LSD.
I'm not saying of course not.
It's always the question. But wait a second. What dose?
What I'm
like
saying,
how much?
About 2 cups.
2 cups, that's a significant amount. But that's interesting because of this.
But it doesn't happen once it's fermented. It's completely gone, and so's all the purple color.
Yes.
And
Well, it's a brownish purple afterwards. I understand what
Yeah,
you
but we
mean.
used to do it in Costa Rica all the time.
And I
when was
corroborate
a
that as
senior.
well. It's very psychedelic to eat the seed and fruit.
But by saying very psychedelic, you mean it's
Very
comparable to mushrooms
No.
and peyote and acid because
Free.
so
It makes you very light.
free. So it suggests that or gives that kind of
Doesn't
No,
make
free.
it's
you all the way
definitely
there.
psychedelic.
You
wouldn't be
get
driving.
colored patterns or.
Absolutely. You get
Oh, okay.
strings, colored patterns.
I'm not being stubborn. I just want to
No,
get clear
people
on
are
this.
swinging light sticks. There's many trails. If
Mhm.
there's any sounds or sensitivity, you can almost.
Okay, well I'll definitely try it. Let's
You
do
should.
Cacahuatl.
There you go.
It also very strongly enhances the mushroom experience if you eat the cacao like that. It's more like you can eat it like this, which is traditional ceremonies,
Mhm.
to continue eating fresh cacao or dried cacao throughout the ceremony.
Yeah.
If you eat the fresh cacao, it's probably 5 times stronger. You get a real strong hit on it.
Yeah, and again, one of the major things about putting mushrooms in the cacao potion also is the fact that they're crushed and made into juice. Like Maria Sabina was observed to take the whole mushrooms, but she would chew them for a half an hour. I mean, just keep chewing like this. And for example, when people present in hospital with mushroom poisoning, they often evacuate the stomach and so forth, and you can see whole mushrooms, or just the pieces, virtually big pieces. They don't digest well, and so you want to blend them in a blender or crush them on the top till you get the juice out, or really chew them well, which is very, very hard. It's something like Slosby cerulescens, which really elicits a gag reflex, and it's harder to get down even in peyote, although it's not bitter. This also is going to greatly increase the bioavailability, as would, I suppose, the monoamine oxidase inhibiting effect, because it's also going to be a substrate for MAO. Okay, well, thanks for your attention.